to another episode of the Etherica podcast. I'm Sky Mathis, joined with Ike Baker. Ike, how are you doing?
I am very good. I'm glad to be back with you. We were on a little bit of a hiatus there. We had some stuff going on in both of our lives, but I'm excited to be back with you, man. How are you?
Me too. I'm doing great. So I'm looking forward to it. I've been lacking on the podcasts last week or so I'm excited to jump back in with you. Um, so I wanted to talk about first. I was coming across some like articles and some people posting things online. Kind of recently, there's been some, I guess, archaeological discoveries they recently found in Israel, I think, related to like Sodom and Gomorrah. Um,
Mm.
so it was interesting. And then I wanted to add, like, I guess there was like some glaze detected on certain artifacts from an extremely high heat event, and they can distinguish like the angle at which things occurred from certain heat signatures. And there's different human remains that they found, like some of them like I guess half intact or whatever. Pretty interesting though. So there's two questions. I was thinking it'd be cool. One, uh, if you kind of just give like an overview of Sodom and Gomorrah briefly, what that story entails, what was going on there from your perspective, and and then so for me, it seems like, if an ancient meteorite hit, the ancients at that time with their worldviews and the place that they were, they could perceive this sort of thing as God punishing them or their land or their people, um, as well as maybe any natural disasters for that matter. But do you find in any of instances that you've may come across, have you ever been compelled that there was a good case to be made that, I mean, I don't know if you'd say God or the demiurge willfully affects the world in these ways, or how do you view those things? So you can kind of address that question however you want.
All right. So Sodom and Gomorrah. That's a topic that I haven't really heard about in a really long time. Um, it seems like for a while it was like I guess passe to talk about. Um, So they were two ancient cities. I think there were like five in total, um, plain cities in the Old Testament. And this is early on because it involves Abraham and Lot. So Abraham and Lot are the two men, along with their wives. Sarai, who was Abraham's wife. I forget Lot's wife's name, but she's got a cool part to play in this story, actually. So Abraham and Lot are asked to leave the city of Ur, which is a Sumerian city. Therefore, they are Sumerian. Uh, and they're petitioned by the god El or Yahweh to leave and worship only him and go where he tells you and follow what he tells you to do. And then he's going to deliver land and his big thing is like lineage. Like I'm gonna you're you'll have these blood lineages that populate nations, and you'll have wealth, and your sons and their sons and their sons and their sons will be kings, and this is like this weird contractual thing. For me, demiurgic, or at least this one particular God, really, Yahweh or El, more of a, for me, my camera went off.
Oh,
More for me, a really warlike kind of God, not the God above God, not the God that Christ was petitioning people to follow. So what essentially happens is that uh, this God that we're talking about now says to Abraham and Lot that there are two cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, and they have to pay for their sins. and that they'll be destroyed by fire and sulfur, right? So that's interesting, right? Because that kind of sounds like a meteor or some sort of cataclysm. But he says that they have to be destroyed by fire and sulfur. And I believe Abraham pleads with this God for to save the cities, but he says it just can't be averted. And there's a version of this in the Quran also. But what's really cool for me is that, so they're told as they're walking away from the destruction, the rubble, not to look back. And Lot's, who is Abraham's nephew, Lot's wife turns and looks, and she immediately turns into a pillar of salt, which is one of those all-time great biblical stories that make it like this crazy, fantasy or like almost like a sci-fi type of thing. It just makes it great reading the Old Testament, really. The punishments that this God just handed out willy-nilly to people. Like you can kind of get, all right, if these people are doing things that are, because here's the thing, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's never specified exactly what sins they were committing, right? We get the term sodomy from Sodom, right? Sodom and Gomorrah. So it's assumed that there's this kind of like homosexuality context to that. And, later on down the line, that God who presents himself to Moses on Mount Sinai as I am that I am. Or he gives Moses, the law. We call it Mosaic law, the laws of Moses, the commandments. There are more than 10, but we kind of famously know 10. And so there's laws that there's proscribing. I think it says, "Thou shalt not, you will not lay with a man. A man shall not lay with another man as he would lay with a woman." Things like this. So you have this Yahweh, this God, kind of delineating like that's a no-no, and I'm gonna destroy you with fire. So totally different than the benevolent, all-loving, omnibenevolent, really transcendent God that Christ points to in the New Testament. Christ in particular is always running to people's aid and petitioning them, petitioning God. He's just always, he doesn't necessarily agree with certain people in the Bible with their behavior, but he certainly does not condemn them. So that's a huge difference. That's one of those classic stories of like, yeah, thinking about Marcionite Gnosticism, these are definitely two characters. These are definitely two different gods. And the whole thing is there's 400 years between the two, right? The Old Testament and the New Testament, there's something like, they call it the intertestamental period, 400 years where there were no prophets in the land of Israel. And then Jesus comes. So it's not like, a lot of people look at it in terms of like, okay, this is contradictory, but it's really not, because they're speaking about two different things. The advent or the event of the Christ figure is really, in the truest sense, a testament to something new in the world, something different, something transcendent. So that's always been the conception that I've had of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. But in terms of like archaeology, I mean, yeah, there's a mountain in Turkey. I think maybe it's Mount Ararat. I don't really know. There's a place in, like, I think the Turkish peninsula where they claim to have, found Noah's Ark and things like that. There's all sorts of, if you remember the History Channel from like my uncle actually used to call the History Channel the Jesus and Hitler channel, which is just hilarious because it's so true. But they were constantly trying to pander to like these Midwestern like old people who were like constantly, they had like TV Guide in one hand and the Bible in the other, and they're just they devoured these shows that attempted consistently to prove the historicity of the Bible. And you get some pretty silly sounding stuff. Some of it's cool. My curiosity for regarding this is like, okay, so how do we know exactly where Sodom and Gomorrah were? You know, do we have coordinates? I'm not sure. So it's we might have a roundabout spot for them, but my thing is generally to avoid that kind of, and I'm not trying, it's, you know, you're asking me my opinion and my thoughts, and so I'm not trying to be derisive about that kind of investigation. I just find it useless until other information first comes to light, which is principally, you know, this alchemical change of perspective that happens in the individual. It says like, oh, yes, it could be possible. It's totally possible. Anything's possible. That Christ was here and Sodom and Gomorrah were evil and they were firebombed by a space god. Anything's possible, but none of it matters because I understand even if somebody made it up completely, or even if it actually physically happened exactly the way they said it did. What's important is the underlying, the archetypal essence of the entire thing, which is there. It's present either way, right? Because everything in the material existence is some kind of symbolic expression of something in the divine realm. An apple, a knife, a shoe. There's some kind of archetype being expressed. And the way I view these stories, particularly of the New Testament, is that they're the same way I go into my ritual space and I enact a ritual drama. I'm not sitting there doing it in my mind and purely in the Yetziratic realm, you know, in Yesod. I'm bringing it all the way down into Malkuth of Messiah, because that's how I want to draw that current of force, that magical power all the way through, so that I ground it, I anchor it here, so that my results are, it must happen. I have now brought something into the world that wasn't here before. And that's the danger of magic, because you're constantly incurring karma. So your best bet is to constantly do magic that is expediting karma, that is theurgic and evolutionary, rather than I want this, I want that. You're literally binding yourself by a million karmic threads. But the same way that I would do that and do the physical ritual and go through the motions and say the words as a symbolic act of things to come, things that must happen in accordance with my will. Therefore, Christ was the magician in his sacrifice. And if it happened for real, then it was a symbolic, dramatic, ritualistic formula for something that had to enter the world. And it could only enter with this formula: go up, take up the cross, and die. So if it was made up, to me, it doesn't lose any power. So I tend not to kind of like have these things on my radar, because really, even if I could make heads or tails of it, which I would be kidding myself if I tried, it still wouldn't really matter that much to me. So I don't know if any of that makes sense, and I hope at least I kind of clarified a little bit the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. But I don't, I'm not really sure what to say about, was it God? Was it this? Was it that? I mean, to me, that's how God does things, whether it's the demiurge or the absolute. It uses the causal chain to make things happen. So if we were to write in the Bible that there were these two cities of Sodom and Gomorrah and a comet hit them, we could believe that. The part that we don't believe is that Abraham spoke to the God that did that, and he pleaded on behalf of the city. That's the part where it gets hairy. But and I'm not doubting that can happen. I know for a fact that it can. You can talk to these entities and they will communicate to you, particularly if you persist in this and gain their favor. Right? That's the whole idea behind magic: gaining the favor of disincarnate entities, whether they're spirits or angels or what have you. That's the entire idea behind it. So that is a possibility. But I guess it's cool. Send me the link. I'd like to read a little bit about that, just because I would like to know for myself what they found.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like with the importance, it's absolutely, you know, more so in the underlying archetypal nature of things or the principles behind these things. I just find prophetic potentiality is really fascinating, just for the sake of trying to identify like legit prophets and things that may validate them, not necessarily for the sake of determining whether or not the events were historical so much, just more interested in and curious about the validity of prophets and prophecies, and trying to find like some compelling instances that would lend a lot of credence to the prophetic nature of some of these individuals, perhaps. um and it's something I haven't really delved a whole lot into, but it's just really interesting to me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, prophecy is huge. In the Old Testament in particular. And then the New Testament, basically, Christ says, well, Matthew says really, and some of the other evangelists, they kind of point to this idea. But Christ says in their gospels, all these prophets were heralding me, because there was a prophetic tradition, a messianic tradition, right? They called it Messiah, Messiah, Savior, somebody who's going to come to redeem the really wasn't about redeeming Gentiles and everybody. It was about the redemption of the Hebrew people once they have fallen into bondage. Because there's this like arc. They're really, really good and they listen to Yahweh or El and then or Adonai, Lord. And then they have all this stuff, and King David comes and he beats Goliath. But then before him, you've got Saul, who really didn't, he kind of was a fuck up, and the Jewish people paid for it. So you've got this arc where they're following Yahweh's laws, and then they're not, and it's this kind of peak and trough cycle. And the prophets always came at those, right at the peak, because that when things are good, that's when the downturn starts. People grow too confident. You don't need God if you're not suffering most of the time. Israel Regardie said that's why suffering is so powerful, an initiator, because we turn to God when everything else has failed. And that's the arc, right? So there's a lesson to be learned there in some of that Old Testament lore. But the prophets came, and largely it was about the downfall of that's really the thing. If you look at I think it's Isaiah. But he's essentially where we get in the Old Testament the term Lucifer. That's not how it was originally written. That's a Latin translation out of the Septuagint, which is really calls him Eosphoros, the morning light, the morning dawn, or something like that. But he's not talking about. If you look at who he's condemning like a Persian or Babylonian king. I mean, and that's the problem with being able to quote chapter and verse of the Bible. Yeah, you know the fucking line, but you have no context because you didn't read all the boring shit that happens before and after. If you read the whole fucking thing, you'd be able to tell like, oh, he's calling. This must have been a title for this king of Persia or wherever it was, because the entire chapter is about the condemnation of that regent, of that sovereign, that king, that physical king. And for some reason, somebody was like, ooh, here, look at this. He's saying, how you have fallen, oh, light of the morning. So that, that means, well, no, he's everything before that is him literally saying explicitly, I'm talking about you, this king, X, Y, and Z. So that was a lot of the prophetic tradition. And the Messianic tradition is something, the prophetic tradition, where the prophets are calling about a savior to redeem Israel. But then Christ comes and he says, look, truly I say unto you, or you have heard it said, X, Y, and Z, quoting the Hebrew law. But verily I say unto you. And then he'll say the complete opposite. And then when they ask him what's going on, why are you doing this? He says, I don't come to break, but I come to plerosai, to make whole the law. So what you had was incomplete, and I am its completion. And basically what he says is, self-sacrifice, and what he says is caring for others, and what he says is, eternal salvation, if you want it, and that kind of stuff. So that's the biblical prophetic. I mean, there's some really cool, surreal stuff in like the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. And then you go for, again, that was also, I think, Nebuchadnezzar, right? I think he was, that's where you get the writing on the wall, tekel, tekel, many floxine, measure, weight, and number, and all these very obscure references to like some king's downfall. And a lot of it happens when they're in the Babylonian exile. They get captured, and then Cyrus the Great is the one who says, go, get out of here, go back, build your temple. After the first temple of Solomon was destroyed, and they spend all this time in Persia. A lot of this stuff was kind of based around that kind of story. There were constantly, because they had no homeland for a really long time, they were constantly taken over by people or entered into these sort of work relationships with them, right? I mean, I think the conception that we have of the Hebrews being the slaves of the Egyptians who built the pyramid is it's a little reductive, it's a little oversimplification, because you see that they, in the archaeological remains, that they had their own cities, they had their own amenities and things like that. And typically slaves don't have that, so they were able to live their lives, and it seems almost like a mutually beneficial relationship, because they were the workforce and Egypt needed a workforce, and they exchanged food and room and board and protection, right? Because Egypt was the most powerful empire in the land. So a lot of the prophetic stuff is generated while they're in bondage, or when they're really starting to hit the downturn because of how good everything is. But there are lots of other types of prophecy. You see it even as far back as the Chaldeans, right? Which are kind of like around the same time, but maybe predate the Egyptian civilization. They used astrology and they used omens for prophecy. And even now in modern magic, we use divination for prophecy and things like that. So, but back then, these prophets were explicitly being spoken to by their God. They were the ones who knew how to do it, and that's what made them special.
And you mentioned more than 10 commandments. I know there's something like the Egyptian 42 commandments of Ma'at. There's like the Babylonian Code of Hammurabi, and then maybe potentially like the Hindu Vedas. Are these sort of things related to expanding upon those original 10 commandments? Some of them possibly mimicking the same ones, or what do you think about that?
I mean, I haven't looked into exactly where they mirror, but generally, yeah, they were laws of civilization. There's this idea of Judeo-Christian morality as some kind of pious construct of control. And I think we're seeing now the fruits of when you remove certain limitations on society, how quickly shit goes south, and how perhaps irreparable the damage is. And I think a lot of these things, right? Because I'm pretty sure that one of the commandments was like against bestiality too. It's like, yeah, that's not good for the continuation of a race or group of people if they're literally trying to fuck camels and things like that. So it's, and I think like George Carlin made a good joke about it. Somebody made some famous stand-up made a good, joke about it, where the guy grabs his camel and he goes, "I think I'm in love," and it's like, that's not what we need to have happen here. We're trying to create social order rather than social chaos. And that's really, I mean, I think there's something like 611 or 613 commandments of Moses, and they're laws, right? They call it Mosaic law. Moses was the lawgiver. Interestingly, he is purported to have been reared and lived his at least a portion of his adult life in Egyptian society, which had lots of laws, right? Because they had a huge, he was part of royalty. He's the brother of Ramesses, right? one of the greatest pharaohs of all time. I forget which Ramesses it was, but they were all pretty good. But so yeah, of course he would have been the one to like tell the people like, okay, if we want to do this, we want to like stay alive and have some sort of growth, here's what we have to do. And I think that, yeah, anytime you have quote unquote commandments, there are laws. Here's the thing, Hammurabi's code, eye for an eye, everybody knows, right? That didn't come directly from God, right? What people are saying, what the Judaic tradition avers, and also, a lot of modern Christian interpretation is that these laws were given to Moses by God. And you have sort of political or state laws, they're not necessarily given by God. But here's the thing. Throughout recorded history, whoever was king had a divine right to rule. The fact doesn't matter if you were good or fucking bad. The fact that you won means God picked you. So any way you cut it, all those laws were thought to be quote unquote God given, right? Because even if whoever, Hammurabi or Nebuchadnezzar, what have you, any of these, Assyrio-Babylonian, Chaldean regions, and even in Egypt, right? The pharaonic line was chosen. They were thought to be gods incarnate. The pharaoh was a god incarnate. That's why he was able to rule. They believed in things like this. Things don't play out without some sort of underlying reason. We view that everything as like this fucking secular power hierarchy of power, and that's why we're fucking eating each other and ourselves alive right now, because of this stupidity. But the reality is that there are some mechanism at work underneath the circumstances in life that allows us to be participants of divine will, and that if you are a fucking king, you have in some way been favored. And I don't disagree with that. I think it's a lot different now with, it gets hairy. My whole thing is that you can be favored by a god. But in my conception, these are the gods, as we understand them, are the archons. They are the things that are put in place to kind of keep us trapped here. So yeah, if I worship one that does this specific thing, if I'm worshiping, Mars or Marduk or Martus, or Eris, all the same conception is war, energy, masculinity, this brute charging force. If I'm going to pay him worship and tribute and live as he would want me to, and honor him as the way that he would want me to, because that's what worship means. Worship doesn't mean grovel. This is a very, very bullshit modern connotation people have in their fucking head. Worship only means honor. That's why you say worshipful in a church. I mean, not a church. It was an archaic way to refer to a judge in the courts of law. Worshipful. Now we say most honorable. Now we say venerable. It all means the same thing. You call the master of a Masonic lodge worshipful master. It doesn't mean I'm groveling. It means that you are honorable. So if I give that God worship, which is honor, he will then favor me. And of course, Mars is in a war. Mars is going to win every time. So these are the way that the mundane things are kind of attached to and influenced by, these archonic threads, these strings which hold everything in place. And you have to deal with them. Even if you're trying to transcend them, right? In theurgy, you have to deal with the archons. You can't ignore them, but you got to step on them like ladders on a rung until you eventually sort of ascend and transcend them. Obviously, only to come back down, right? But so that was a rather long-winded spiel. I hope you're happy with where it ended.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of seems like a lot of the, different versions, whether it's the commandments that we know biblically or the stuff recorded within Egyptian hieroglyphics, or whether it's the Code of Hammurabi or whatever, these things are probably just truths and natural laws recognized by their cultures and their societies that stood and held true, that they were underlying archetypes of, truth and how things worked, cause and effect, things along these lines. And that was probably uh what a lot of these things were. Do you feel like that's a pretty fair assessment?
I think that you summed that up in a way I probably should have. I think that's
Cool.
perfect.
All right. So I wanted to
I
ask.
mean, even I'm pretty sure Jared Diamond talks about it in his like it is just this has contributed to this like reframing of the narrative against uh popular culture as it is in the West, which is that's not good either. But I think he talks about how like severe disease crept into the human population by like animal husbandry at a certain point. That's how like infectious disease was communicated. I'm pretty sure. But the idea I'm trying to get across here is like, yeah, you got to have rules in place. You got people sleeping with animals. Like, we're really teetering on the edge here. And obviously, I think at one point, you know, it might have been like, why did they need to tell people that? But now with the breakdown of civilization, I'm pretty sure you need to tell everybody to keep their dicks out of everything. So, it's like people are going fucking crazy. So,
That's hilarious. All right. So know thyself. It was written on, what was it, the Temple of Delphi or something like that, in Greek. What was the correct pronunciation of that in the Greek?
notiseuton.
Okay. And that word, it's like basically it's like Satan. Is that right?
It sounds like that, but it's
It's
not
different
related.
though.
It's
Okay.
not related to Satan. Yeah,
So
that is it's not cognate. It's not etymologically related. It's so sas is you. Agaposas means I love you. That's how you say you in Greek. And seuton don is like an alternate ending. So in other words, like people don't realize this because it got stripped off with the Latin and italic pronunciation, but like Apollo, that's not how you say that in Greek. Apollon
mm,
or Plato, that's not how you say that in Greek. It's Platon, Platono. There's an N at the end of it. But things just get pared down and contracted over the ages because palates are lazy, like people. But so you lose those endings. So Seuton is related to yourself. That's all it is. Not the obviously being we see gnosis, right? GNO. That's an Indo-European actual root, to be honest. That even predates the Greek. It ended up in that language. So Seuton means like yourself. It has nothing to do with Satan.
okay. Yeah, I was curious about that because I was listening back to one of our podcasts and I was like wondering, is there like a correlation there? Does that etymologically have any sort of similar root or whatever? So yeah, I was
No,
just
what Satanas is like a Satanas is or Satanas is that's Semitic. So those words, I think, actually it comes more. It's more like so they share a root. Arabic, Aramaic, Hebrew. They all share this Proto-Semitic root. Semitic, obviously, being the people of what we consider the modern day Middle East. That's their linguistic root. And Satanas means obviously.
oh, you cut out.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, I can.
So
You're saying what it means?
Satanas means the see look there you go. I'm getting cut out. um, Satanas means the accuser or the adversary. So they're etymologically not cognate. They come from different uh, linguistic sort of pools.
Yeah. So like ultimately, like with something like Satanism, it's I don't know. I think we did discuss this a little bit, but I mean, in the true sense of the world, in the true sense of the world, it being related to adversarial things, would it be seen that to be satanic is to be adversarial?
Well, not really, because here's the thing. We have to define where our standpoint is in terms of the adversary, right? Because if I'm the bad guy
Mm.
and somebody's adversarial to me, they're probably the good guy, right? So that's an oversimplification drastically. But I want to show, like, the perspective changes depending on your subjective relation to what we're talking about. But satanic, this is an extremely complicated, not only historic but linguistic equation. And then if you want to get past all that confusion that happens, that conflation, that misnomer, that just because it's easy to call everything fucking evil, that they lump everything together. Be scared, be scared. When you get past all the historicity, all the academic and hyper rational interpretation of that stuff, and then you want to talk about the spiritual, right? Now we're admitting that this thing exists. We got to figure out what it is. Academics don't do that. They don't admit that it exists. So they're constantly, they're chasing their tails, because that's the easiest, right? Insight, gnosis, is the easiest way to kind of perceive the nature of something. You could describe a fucking apple to me till you're blue in the face. I have no idea what an apple is until I've tasted it or seen it grow on a tree, something like that. That's just the way it is. So that's why discursive reasoning can only get you so fucking far. At a certain point, you have to shit or get off the pot. Do it, touch it, feel it, experience it. And in order to do that, you have to admit something is real. So, if I don't think Sky exists, I'm never going to go to his house to see it. So, but I would say that Satanism is putting yourself before everything else, and that Christianity is putting the good of everything else before the good of yourself, because you recognize them as one and the same. Satanism is the pull towards material gratification, feeding the animal part, right? Plato conceived of the human being as having a tripartite soul. And essentially, you see this in the allegory of his Phaedrus, the allegory of the charioteer. And there's a charioteer, and he's got these two horses. One's dark, one's black, one's white. And one pulls downward, one pulls upward. They pull in opposite directions. It's the charioteer's job to be able to, pull them into submission and drive them somewhere towards a unified purpose. And so he calls them the appetitive, which is the animal aspect. It's the part of us in initiated esotericism, we call this the threefold bond of the material inclination. We are inclined towards material things because what we are is ensouling a physical mechanism that has needs, desires, feelings, impulses. To gratify that is to identify only with the animal. That's why Satan is depicted as a beast, several beasts. He's a composite beast. It's a fucking chimera. That's why they show him as a goat, as a goat. Now, the thing is, and there's also symbolism in the shape of the goat with its horns and its ears and its beard, right? Because that is the inverted pentagram. You take the pentagram upright, and it's the holy symbol of the Pythagoreans. It's man, the microcosm, right? You see it in Vitruvian Man. You see it in Agrippa and his drawings. And it's basically the four elements corresponded to the four lower appendages. And then the fifth element, the quintessence of spirit, corresponded to the neck and head. And that's upright. And that means that the spirit, the rational, the conscious faculty of man, which has been endowed to him by the divine, governs that part of himself which is composed of the material elements. You invert that and you say, via symbol, right? Because the symbols are the teachings, everything else is commentary. What I'm giving you is commentary. The symbol itself is the fucking teaching. If I invert that image, I now have the four elements dominating spirit. And so that's why you have this kind of grotesque goat. It is multifaceted. You have the inverted pentagram, and then you have this bestial nature because it's identified with the physical, the part of our evolution which is which comes from beasts, right? Comes from monkeys and things like this. And so that's when you're gratifying those things. When that happens, you have become satanic. And the interesting thing is that that is delineated in the satanic, they give, it's like Satanism light. They give you this whole fucking rigmarole of secular humanism. Oh, well, we just be kind and let everybody do their thing, and you do your thing. And if anybody bothers you, you should fucking hurt them. Like that's when we're like, okay, everything just went south. That's the dark part that allows itself off the leash. The issue is that makes sense to most people nowadays because our entire society has undergone this satanic program. And I'm not moralizing this as like Christian or non-Christian. I'm giving you the philosophy behind this stuff, the images, the how to identify this stuff, and why it's been a trope. It's been a stereotype. It's been a truism in human existence. And now we want to get rid of that because we have been trained on how to be satanic, how to live that way, and we're fucking enjoying it. And then we're pointing our fingers at everything around us. It's this, it's Republicans, it's Democrats, it's fucking Ukraine, it's Russia. It's us. It's us. We're behaving satanically. We are generating the causes for evil effects, truly destructive. Really, we are burying our own souls. And now they want to stick us in fucking virtual reality, and it's become a dream within a dream within a dream. It's we're so far down the fucking rabbit hole. But as long as if a single person remembers this stuff, it's not dead yet. If a single person understands this stuff, it's not dead yet. You cannot defeat the truth. You cannot, because it's everywhere. Our entire realm here, elsewhere, the entire strata of our being is composed of nothing if not truth alone. So you cannot kill truth, but you can obscure people's ability to recognize it. And that's what postmodernism is. And that's what this philosophy is doing. That is satanic. It's a religion. It's a satanic religion, postmodernism. And the last thing I'll say on that is that people are taking their postmodern secularized programming, and then they are entering into spiritual traditions through that perspective lens. And that's making things even fucking worse because it's contaminating spirituality with a secular perspective.
Yeah. And so we have a lot of people out there discussing things like, and they'll use the words satanic ritual abuse. And I don't know if this is based on evidence that always bridges these things with Satan or a figure named Satan or an idea named Satan, or if it's just assumptions, like if they're calling these things satanic ritual abuse. I don't know if they're assuming that there's like a physical figure that will, the people doing it. I don't know if they're assuming there's like a physical figure named Satan that will grant them powers or whatever the reasons may be behind a lot of it. So I'm curious, like some of your thoughts around these instances, or I don't know if you've gone down and looked in that area or whatever with satanic ritual abuse cases. Like some Satanists, I don't even know if they look at things like this. There's like different versions. It seems like they have more of a liberation ideology. It seems like a confusing mess. So yeah, I don't know.
Well, that's what you said right there. That's the key to making Satanism palatable. You turn everything into a confusing fucking mess. You confound people. That's how they buy this stuff. Now the issue with satanic ritual abuse is, do I think it exists? Absolutely. And as I've said to you before on this podcast, Like if there's something out there like a conspiracy or a religion or anything like that, I have sat with it probably for several years and thought about it. I do not turn my eye away from fucking anything. It's just what's being honest with what stage am I at in assimilation and understanding. I'm not going to come to these conclusions and be based on a knee-jerk reaction. You know, a lot of people hate fucking rich people. You know why? Because you don't have any fucking money. That's why you hate them. You hate what they have. You hate what they represent, which is your failure as you perceive it, right? Because at the end of the day, money is not success. But a lot of people feel that way, that, oh, my problems would be solved X, Y, and Z. So you project. You're all too willing to believe that these people are evil pieces of shit. You want that to be true. So you believe it. It's not the case all the time. The issue is that, you know, obviously the people who hold power in this world have to have money. That's the whole game is money, is the economy. That's how they get us to buy into this. And if we're going to change anything about our physical circumstances, the first thing we should do is get off of completely cold fucking turkey. Get off of. Doesn't matter. We're headed towards an economic crash. Like the plane is nosediving. You might as well just fucking pedal to the metal and see who and what survives. Okay, that's how it has to happen right now. Because realistically, there is no way of stopping this. But to get off of our current monetary system and not exchange it for something that is the same system under a different name, that probably, like I've said before, I don't give a tuppeny fuck about exterior change. I truly don't. But if somebody twisted my arm and said, what do we do? I say, that's it. Get off of money completely. That's how they get us to buy in. That's how they control us. And we could have 4 podcast episodes about that. But so I won't go too far into that mechanism. But the issue behind these wealthy families and things like that that practice satanic ritual abuse, and even poor families, is that human beings are programmable. I've said it before. And nothing programs you so fucking completely as trauma. Trauma will destroy you. And it will allow your abuser to put things into you and program you. And this confusion of everything, morally, scientifically, spiritually, is a kind of trauma. It is a species of trauma. We are no longer sane because we have undergone prolonged, excessive trauma. The war on terror, the war in Vietnam, all these fucking wars. You know, cancers, you gotta worry about that. One day it's just gonna show up on a fucking test, even if you're a long distance runner who's eaten nothing but kale his whole life. You know, it's prolonged trauma. We don't know what's what. We don't know up from fucking down, asshole from elbow. We have no clue. And so we're becoming more programmable because we're clinging to these ideologies and groupthink. We're clinging to the security of a massive egregore, powerful egregore. And so, yeah, I believe in satanic ritual abuse because the only way for other human beings to be able to perpetrate this on us is to be programmed as completely desensitized.
Definitely. All right. Next question. I want to ask you about Enochian. This is something we kind of touched on in one of our last episodes. So I was curious, you know, when it comes to maybe practicing calls or uttering Enochian or getting familiar with the information, we've talked about like the importance of being ready and equipped prior to engaging Enochiana before, you know, getting into it. But like, where's the line when it comes to incurring risk on behalf of the curious that want to explore Enochian? Like, where would you say it comes to the point where you want to be careful and to not cross the line where you're getting into dangerous territory or things along those lines? Like, is it fine to you know, get familiarized with the language, the calls, like things like this, or how would you go about describing your perspective on that?
I approach these things with a modicum of severe caution. I will err on the side of caution maybe to a fault. I would say don't practice any of this shit. Don't even look at it until you have been an experienced magician within either a D derivative, I would say like a Western magical tradition. But the thing is that the Enochian of the Golden Dawn is different from the Enochian system that D put and Kelly ended up deriving from the angelic scrying sessions. And Aaron Leach does a really good job of explaining that in his books. But I wouldn't, I mean, I would do the D stuff before I would do the Golden Dawn stuff, because you're not, like, if you get a hold of a Golden Dawn D book, you know, Enochian book, you're not going to know what is going on because it's way more complicated. And way more, you need basically like a college education equivalent in the Golden Dawn system in order to comprehend what's happening, why, how to do these things. If you were to work the more, I guess, quote unquote, purist D system, I think there's just more shit that you need, you know, which is saying a lot, because you need a lot of stuff in Golden Dawn ritual. I could be incorrect about that. I've only read about it. I've never tried, you know, D purist Enochian, because I err on the side of caution. I'm working Enochian now, and it's like I'm still trying to be as cautious as possible. If you have not spent, I think a minimum of 5 years in preparation for it, don't go near it. And then that's me, right? That's just what I'm telling you. And then, because there's a tendency towards dissolution, these forces are so, you're invoking a current which is so dissolutive, which is so radically alchemical, that if you have not experienced an attenuated version of, for lack of a better term, osirification, right? The alchemy of the outer order of the Golden Dawn enacts this on you. It's a solve et coagula formula. You undergo the taking apart and then the reassembly of the constituent aspects of your psyche, your spiritual architecture. You recombine them under the auspices of the spirit. Enochian is that, like, on fucking steroids. So I don't know how much of that you want to try as your first foray. A lot of people are very confident, you know, but that's, pride is the beginning of the fall. Pride comes before the fall, really. So I would say stay away from it, particularly also, if you have any kind of addiction, known or like acknowledged or unacknowledged, stay away from it. And if you have no experience with vision work, stay away from it. I just would not, the Golden Dawn system, the reason why I like that route is because it builds these safeguards into it. A lot of people say, well, those are just arbitrary. It's like, yes and no, because there's this third element or that's there. It's not just you and your experience of what's going on. There is some sort of, in music, I guess we'd call it sauce that, is unspecified. And I find that I am able to tell when I am scrying the veracity of the vision based on the course of safeguards given to me in my training in the Golden Dawn. If you don't have those, I mean, who knows what, you don't know what you're talking about.